Hey guys, tonight we follow a sun god with questionable hobbies, an alarming overconfidence in natural science, and absolutely no business handling insects. That's right, Apollo the beekeeper. Picture this: golden light spilling over a sleepy meadow, pollen floating in the air like lazy confetti, and a radiant, toga-wearing immortal loudly declaring he's going to revolutionize honey. You probably won't survive this story from sheer second-hand embarrassment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. I also love hearing where you're listening from. Drop your location and the local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge beside Apollo, god of the sun. Music, poetry, archery, and apparently now bees. He's glowing, literally, but you're already sweating, not just from his solar aura, but from dread. See, he's recently decided the celestial responsibilities aren't fulfilled anymore. I need something grounding, he says, brushing a golden strand of hair from his brow. Something with wings. Something buzzy. He points to a humble little apiary perched on a gentle hill. It's rustic, definitely not divine, and built by a retired satyr who sold it to Apollo in exchange for a lute and a promise never to sing in public again. You approach the hive and, well, let's just say it's buzzing with uncertainty. You'd think a god would do his research. But Apollo just assumes that since he once saw bees fluttering around nectar and thought, hey, that's kind of poetic, it's basically a calling. He walks right up to the hive, reaches in with his bare hand, because he's Apollo, and immediately yelps as a dozen bees express their displeasure. Ow. He shouts, inspecting his hand. They don't like me? You try to gently explain that beekeeping takes a little patience, and maybe a little gear, like gloves, and a veil, and not screaming. But Apollo paces dramatically in his leather sandals. They must sense the power in me, he declared. Perhaps I should recite them to him. Bees appreciate rhythm. Spoiler, they do not. He pulled out his lyre. You flinch. The bees, understandably, begin to swarm again. The melody is lovely, celestial even, but to the hive it sounds like a sonic attack. They surged. Apollo sprints. You dive for a nearby bush. Somewhere in the background, a dryad chuckles softly. Over the next few days, he redoubles his efforts. He starts naming the bees. Queen bee is now Queen Heliodora. The drones are dubbed Photon, Goldie, and inexplicably, Gavin. Apollo thinks this will endear him to them, create trust. A personal bond. He begins drawing little suns on their hive. They need to know I'm with them, he tells you, smearing honey across the bark like a deranged preschool art project. I shine. They shine. It's symbiotic. You try not to point out that the hive has started to lean unnaturally to the left, or that it's oozing. In a quiet moment, you sit together watching the bees zip in and out of their skewed little palace. Apollo sighed. Did you know, he says, that ancient Mycenaean warriors used honey to treat wounds? It's antiseptic. Healing. Golden like me. That part is actually true. Historians agree that honey was prized for its medicinal qualities in early Greek civilization, used for everything from battlefield bandages to embalming. But your admiration fades when Apollo immediately uses that fact to justify smearing honey on a paper cut. The bees gave me this gift, he says, licking his fingers. I honor them. Meanwhile, Gavin the drone has taken up a suspicious interest in your exposed ankle. Still, there's a spark of something hopeful here. A divine being stepping into a simpler world. The smell of warm wax in the sun. The hum of industry as bees drift like sleepy dancers across clover patches. Even Apollo seems calmer. He starts sketching plans for a radiant honey amphitheater, whatever that is. You don't ask. But even among the golden rays, things start to unravel. See, there's an old rumor, definitely fringe, and rarely mentioned outside cracked amphorae and obscure scrolls, that Apollo once tried this exact hobby in another age, under another name. Some fringe scholars argue he was Melicius, a mythical bee god and ancient king who raised Zeus himself on wild honey. Others think that was just a symbolic tale, a way to sweeten Apollo's backstory. Historians still argue whether Melicius was Apollo in disguise or a totally different mythic figure. Some say even a mistranslation of a bee tamer priest. Regardless, it's a curious echo. One that maybe Apollo remembers, if only dimly. But as you lie beneath a laurel tree, watching a solar deity smear nectar on tree bark like sunscreen, it becomes clear, this is not a god with a plan. This is a hobbyist in denial. And these bees? They're just trying to live their 6-week lives without being immortalized in another tragic hymn. You sigh. Gavin buzzes past your ear. Apollo waves his lyre overhead like a beekeeper's wand, announcing, "Tomorrow, we bottle the sun." He has no idea what that means. You wake to the sound of humming, not the sleepy kind, but the kind that suggests organized air traffic. Bees swirl overhead in steady arcs, forming hypnotic patterns against the pinkish sky. Apollo stands nearby, chest out, arms akimbo, face beaming. He's wearing a crown made entirely of honeycomb. "It symbolizes my reign," he says, not even trying to swat away the bees crawling into his golden curls. "A kingdom of nectar, a dynasty of pollen." You blink slowly. One bee lands delicately on your lip. You don't react. You've learned. Overnight, Apollo has gone full entrepreneurial. He's given the hive a name, Heliodrone. There's a logo now, an unnecessarily complex sunburst design scratched into bark with arrows and sparkles, and at least one lyre. He's drafted marketing slogans. His favorite so far? "Taste the dawn." You ask if he's actually harvested any honey yet that he pauses. Well, not technically, but spiritually, yes. The truth is, Apollo still hasn't figured out the difference between nectar and honey. This morning, he collected a handful of sticky liquid from a daffodil and proclaimed it divine syrup. He tries to pour it into a clay amphora, but it just slides pathetically down the side. "It's the texture of destiny," he whispered. The bees, increasingly unimpressed, buzz away to find flowers not currently being groped by a sun deity. Still, there's hope on the horizon, or so you think. When Apollo enlists help, he calls upon a few woodland nymphs to join his beekeeping collective. Their names are Chloris, Daphne, not that Daphne, and Brizoe, who claims she once taught a bear to respect bees. They arrive barefoot, smelling of crushed herbs, and all of them immediately outclass Apollo in every practical skill. Within minutes, Chloris has gently rebalanced the hive structure using only a reed and some twine. Daphne finds a water source for the bees. Brizoe, humming quietly, coaxes a whole swarm to calmness by just standing nearby. Apollo claps excitedly. "We're a team." You quietly observe that the nymphs don't seem nearly as enthusiastic. To be fair, the woodland nymphs don't hate Apollo's presence, but they're clear here for the bees. Apollo, meanwhile, is still mostly interested in naming things. He points to a particularly shiny bee. "That one's Solaria. She's the chosen queen. I can tell by her vibe." You squint. "That's a worker bee." Also, she seemed visibly angry. Undeterred, Apollo begins to choreograph the bees. "If we can get them to fly in formation, maybe in the shape of my lyre, it could double as a marketing campaign. Or, wait, what if I compose a symphony for the bees? Something minimalist. Buzzcore." This is followed by a 3-hour jam session during which he alternates between lyre and panpipes while the bees do their best to pretend he doesn't exist. A highlight. Apollo invents a new genre he calls hymncomb. You hear it described as acoustic droning with layers of solar vibration. It sounds like someone dropped a harp into a blender full of basil. The nymphs are patients. But Brizoe eventually stages a gentle intervention. She explains, very diplomatically, that bees aren't inspired by human music, that their rhythm is nature, that they need consistency, shade, and gentle weather, not divine crescendos and weekly rebranding. Apollo nods solemnly, then immediately scrawls "consistency is the new cool" on a fig leaf and tapes it to the hive. Somewhere, a cicada sighs, but even through the overconfidence and musical chaos, you start to notice something new. Apollo's optimism is contagious. He's like a golden retriever with god powers, completely unqualified, slightly dangerous, but somehow making everyone laugh. Even the bees seem less agitated today. Chloris claims they're producing more wax. Brizoe starts talking about a second hive, and Apollo, sweet, glowing Apollo, tries to taste his first spoonful of actual honey. He dips in too quickly and knocks over the collection bowl. Honey glops all over his feet. He slips and lands in a flower bed. 3 bees land directly on his nose. "I am part of the hive," he whispered, eyes wide. "We are one." You step around him carefully. He smells like a dessert. The sun tilts lazily overhead. You and Apollo sit beside the hive, drowsy from heat and the sticky sweetness in the air. He points upward. "Did you know the Greeks believed bees were messengers between worlds? Between the mortal and the divine?" You nodded. "That part is historically accurate. In ancient Greek thought, bees symbolized purity and the soul. Priestesses of Demeter and Artemis were sometimes called Melissae, bee women. In certain oracles, bees were even believed to carry divine messages. Buzz translations from the beyond. But then Apollo adds, so I figure, if I train them right, they can deliver notes to the underworld. Maybe love letters. Or passive-aggressive memos to Hades. You stare. He smiles. And maybe, just maybe, a recipe. He pulls out a papyrus scroll labeled Golden Honey Cake, beta version. The ingredients include sunbeam zest, ambrosia dust, and whatever Brizoe was humming about yesterday. You don't have the heart to correct him. By late afternoon, the nymphs have gone. The bees are tucked in. Apollo is lying on his back, humming to the sky, arms spread in sticky triumph. The honey crown has wilted. He doesn't care. I'm going to bottle this feeling, he murmured. Sell it to the stars. You close your eyes. The hum fades. For now, everything is sweet. You wake to the sound of humming. Not the sleepy kind, but the kind that suggests organized air traffic. Bees swirl overhead in steady arcs, forming hypnotic patterns against the pinkish sky. Apollo stands nearby, chest out, arms akimbo, face beaming. He's wearing a crown made entirely of honeycomb. It symbolizes my reign, he says, not even trying to swat away the bees crawling into his golden curls. A kingdom of nectar, a dynasty of pollen. You blink slowly. One bee lands delicately on your lip. You don't react. You've learned. Overnight, Apollo has gone full entrepreneurial. He's given the hive a name, Heliodrone. There's a you wake up to a crunch. Apollo has stepped on a sandal. Not just any sandal. His own, ancient, leather-bound, radiant sandal, now glued firmly to the earth by a thick, glittering smear of honey. He stared at it with a mix of reverence and confusion, as if it's a newly discovered oracle tablet. I may have created something sacred, he whispered. You squint. It's definitely not sacred. It's a mess. A sticky, amber mess attracts ants the size of olives. Apollo, ever the optimist, scoops up the honey-ruined sandal, holds it in both hands, and proclaims, "This is ambrosia." He gives it a lick. You gag a little. So does a bee. Apparently, somewhere between sunbeam zest and vibe-checking pollen, Apollo has convinced himself that raw honey equals ambrosia, the food of the gods. You remind him that, traditionally, ambrosia was a divine nectar, probably imagined as citrusy wine syrup with mystical properties, not the unfiltered goop clinging to his arch support. But Apollo shrugged, fingers dripping. I am the god. If I eat it, it becomes divine. You make a mental note never to touch his cooking utensils that he tries to share. You must taste this, he insists, smearing a generous glob on a fig leaf and waving it dangerously close to your face. Feel the glow. Taste the cosmos. You're saved by a rogue breeze that blows the leaf into a tree directly nearby. Apollo nods solemnly. Even nature agrees. It must be shared with the world. And by the world, he apparently means Zeus. Yes, that's Zeus, king of the gods. Thunderbolt happy, easily angered. Apollo's father and most reluctant audience. Apollo crafts a care package, an amphora decorated with painted bees, stuffed with crushed flower petals, and sealed with a kiss. He ties it with laurel twine and attaches a scroll titled Sun Honey, a revolutionary elixir from the desk of Apollo. You follow him to the summit, where he places the offering at the foot of a cloud staircase used exclusively by divine couriers and irritable storm spirits. Shall we? He says, smiling. You don't want to go to Mount Olympus. But you're there anyway, moments later, watching the honey gift descend in the talons of a very confused eagle. Apollo waves. Tell him it pairs well with figs. You brace for thunder. None comes, yet. But later that afternoon, a reply does. It isn't formal. It isn't kind. It's a sandal. Apollo's sandals. Returned from Olympus. Still sticky. And now singed, a charred note clings to the heel. It reads, in jagged script, "Stop sending me foot condiments." Z. Apollo reads it aloud. Twice. Then turns to you. So he did try it. You rub your temples. For the rest of the day, Apollo sulks beneath an olive tree, strumming melancholic chords on his lyre. He plays something that sounds suspiciously like a sad version of Flight of the Bumblebee. The bees ignore him. One lands on his nose. He doesn't react, and still, because Apollo is, above all, a performer, He's back at it the next morning. New plan. He will infuse the honey with his own divine essence. I'll make it glow, he says, eyes wide. People love things that glow. You try to explain that glowing food may raise questions. Like, is this edible? And will this make my teeth shimmer forever? But Apollo's already stirring honey with a beam of filtered sunlight from his fingertip. The result? A jar of honey that, okay, does look magical. It pulses faintly with golden light, like it's storing miniature sunsets. He calls it helio-glazed. It has top notes of radiation, he says, and a hint of optimism. You quietly note it smells mostly like warm grass and regret. He prepares a taste test. Guests include 2 woodland squirrels, a disinterested satyr named Krek, and you. The squirrels seemed interested until their whiskers began to shimmer. Krek licks it once, mumbles something about feeling my liver hum, and immediately wanders into a ravine. Apollo beams. Success. You do not agree. By sunset, he's redesigned the hive again. Now it's perched on a marble pedestal with carved solar motifs. Bees, of course, hate this. One promptly stings him on the earlobe. An initiation rite, he mumbled, eyes watering. Still, he doesn't give up. That's the maddening part. He is relentless. Endearingly so. Like a child with unlimited power and zero ability to read a manual. Every failure is, to him, a sacred step toward brilliance. Do you think the muses had bad honey days? He asks you, pouring his 12th failed batch into a hollowed-out gourd. You shake your head. They probably didn't try to reinvent honey. He nods thoughtfully. That's where I shine. Meanwhile, in one of the few historical facts that might support Apollo's whole vibe, you remember that ancient Greeks did prize honey highly, not just for food, but in ritual and medicine. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, and featured in religious offerings. Some scholars even argue that it symbolizes a bridge between the mortal and the divine. After all, honey never spoils. It exists outside time. Eternal. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly believed honey could carry prayers to the gods, or whether that was just poetic metaphor layered onto sticky practicality. Either way, the symbolism is stuck. Like, well, honey, which brings you to the amphora now leaking on your sandal. Apollo has knocked over another batch. He tries to clean it with olive leaves, then with his tunic, then, inexplicably, with fire. Bad idea. A small flame catches on the honey-soaked bark. You both panic. Bees panic harder. Apollo flings the lyre. You stamp out sparks with your bare feet. Gavin the bee dive bombs Apollo's hair at its chaos. Divine, smoky chaos. When it's over, everyone's a little singed. The hive is slightly crooked again. Apollo's tunic is toasted at the hem. But he's laughing. I think I'm getting the hang of this, he says, holding up a half-melted honeycomb like a trophy. You sit in the grass, sticky and exhausted. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks like it's judging you. You wake to the unmistakable scent of thyme. Not wild thyme. No, this thyme is arranged. Carefully cultivated. Slightly smug. Apollo has created a herb garden overnight, and by created, you assume he means magically forced into symmetrical spirals. Every bush is pruned to an impossible shape. One like a bee, one like a lyre, and, somehow, one like his own face. Bees appreciate aesthetics, he says, cradling a basket of lavender sprigs like a newborn. You ask what this has to do with honey. Flavor profiles, he replies solemnly, are everything. The new plan, aromatherapeutic honey. If I can influence their pollen choices, he explains, gesturing dramatically to a chalkboard labeled Project Sun Syrup, then I can guide the notes of the honey itself. Time for depth. Sage for mystery. Mint for sass. You're not sure if sass is a flavor note, but you don't argue. The bees, meanwhile, seem indifferent. They're pollinating a nearby patch of wild fennel with no regard for Apollo's herbscaping. That's okay, he says. I believe in creative freedom. It's the first time he's said that about anything, and you savor the moment. By midday, he's fully immersed in his new role as floral director. He's weaving garlands, pressing petals, and composing haikus about nectar nuance. He even tries to pair different flowers with different types of sunlight. Morning daffodils, noon rosemary, twilight chamomile. That it's exhausting to watch. But you can't deny it's starting to work. The honey tastes subtly different. More layered. Less chaotic. Brizoe returns briefly, tastes a sample, and raises an eyebrow in rare approval. Apollo floats on the praise like a dandelion puff. Next step, he announces, is bee morale. You didn't realize morale was a measurable bee metric, but he assures you it is. He builds them a relaxation zone, pebbled paths, moss cushions, tiny fountains, and an amphitheater where he performs calming pan flute sets. Point 1 bee falls asleep on his shoulder. He nearly cries. See, he says. They trust me. You're skeptical until you spot a peculiar sight. Bees clustered in an intentional spiral on the hive face. It's not normal behavior, but it is pretty. Almost like they're mimicking Apollo's herb patterns. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greeks believed bees had ritualistic intelligence. Some scholars cite the dance language of bees as evidence that their patterns were interpreted as omens, movements predicting storms, harvests, even wars. Others claim that was just bored shepherds staring at hives too long. But you're watching something now that seems oddly purposeful. There's rhythm, design, dare you say choreography? Apollo notices too. He starts humming a melody. The bees adjust. You both freeze. Are we making music with them? He whispers. You nod, a little afraid. This triggers a full-day experiment Apollo calls bee sync. He composes a slow, buzzing harmony on his lyre and tries to play in tandem with the hive's movements. The results are bizarre. At one point, the bees form a loose spiral and pulse in tempo. Then a breeze hits, and they scatter. Apollo insists that was just an intermission. Later, he begins naming individual bees based on their rhythm patterns. That one, tempo. That one, syncopation. That little guy's name is Beance. You suggest a nap, but Apollo is electric. He's sketching bee notation on scrolls, mapping pollen paths like sheet music. I think I've invented insect jazz, he declares, breathless. They improvise in 6-pedal time. You do not ask what that means. By evening, the bees are clearly tired. So are you. But Apollo, sweet, glowing, insufferably energetic Apollo, is now hosting a nectar-tasting symposium. He has made tiny thimble goblets carved from acorns. He lays them out on a flat rock like a tasting menu. Every sample is introduced with a soliloquy. This one was kissed by time at dawn. This one carries echoes of mint and longing. This one might have a hint of pine, or possibly my bathwater. You make the mistake of sipping the last one. It's definitely bathwater that he seems proud anyway. Despite the weirdness, the honey is undeniably improving. The texture is silkier, the color a richer gold. It's still not ambrosia, but it's something. You both sit and watch the sun melt behind the hills, jars of sunlight-flavored honey stacked around you like treasure. Apollo leans back, sighing happily. I think I finally understand the bees. He says that you're about to agree when he adds. They're tiny alchemists. They turn flower ghosts into edible sunshine. You pause. That might actually be profound. And in that warm, droning dusk, something shifts. Apollo stops talking, stops planning, just sits. The breeze softens. A few bees buzz lazily overhead. The hive breathes gently behind you. For the first time in days, you all exist in the same rhythm. For a moment, you even forget the chaotic foot condiment incident. You wake to humming, not lyre humming, not Apollo humming. This is a collective, vibrating hum that seems to radiate from every direction at once. It's as if the very air has decided to hold a tuning fork against your skull. You stumble outside and find Apollo standing motionless, arms outstretched, eyes closed, as bees orbit him like lazy satellites. I've entered their frequency, he says. You don't know what that means, and frankly, you don't wanna. Still, there's something different today. The bees are flying in tighter loops, more coordinated, almost military in their efficiency. The honeycomb looks cleaner, more geometric. The hive hums like it's thinking. And Apollo? Apollo is practically vibrating with smug serenity. I call this phase the harmonic epic. You blink slowly. Every good production reaches this moment, he explains. It's when chaos becomes art. The music writes itself. The flavors align. The bees stop stinging my neck. You glance down. His neck is very swollen. Still, you can't deny the progress. The hive is thriving. The honey is glowing, literally, and tastes like lemony light wrapped in velvet. Even Gavin the bee has stopped head-butting your nose. It's eerie that Apollo's confidence has now ballooned to catastrophic proportions. Today, he announces, is branding day. You try to hide behind a fig tree. Too late. He unveils a banner made from pressed rose petals and saffron threads. It reads, Apollo's Nectar, now with 30% more divinity. You side out there's more. He presents the packaging prototype, amphory made of tinted beeswax, sealed with gold-threaded fig leaves and stamped with a tiny embossed sunburst. Each one is labeled with a haiku about that batch's emotional tone. You read one aloud. Mint wind in my beard time weeps into golden light taste the sky and hushy claps. You get it. You do not get it. But you admit it's strangely comforting. Then comes the hard sell. Apollo insists on organizing a full tasting for his siblings. Artemis, Hermes, even Athena. Zeus can come too, he adds. But only if he brings his own spoon. You strongly advise against this. I'm ready, he says. They'll understand what I've created. I'm not just a sun god. I'm an apiarist visionary. You remind him that the last time he sent Zeus a food product, he got back a scorched sandal and a one-star review written in lightning. But Apollo is undeterred. This time, he says, there are haikus. Later that afternoon, he sends out celestial invitations via hawk-feather scrolls. Wear open sandals and an open mind, they read, and prepare to weep with flavor. You wish you were kidding. As the sun dips, the guests arrive. Artemis shows up first, bows slung across her back, flanked by two unimpressed deer. She eyes the bees warily. I hope this isn't like the last time you tried fermented starlight, she mutters. Hermes swoops in next, wings on his sandals flapping noisily, already chewing on something. Did someone say snacks? Athena arrives fashionably last, dressed in academic indifference and the faint aroma of scroll ink. She raises a brow at the amphor display. This smells like overconfidence. Apollo beams. It tastes like enlightenment. He guides them through a 5-course honey tasting, complete with musical interludes and forced poetry readings. The siblings endure it, mostly. Artemis samples politely. Hermes drinks directly from a honey jar and shouts, zing. Athena takes exactly one taste, tilts her head, and mutters, pine, citrus, and desperation. Apollo looks thrilled. And you? You're holding the emergency water jug in case anyone's lips begin to sparkle again. Midway through the event, something unexpected happens. Hermes drops his jar. Wait a minute, he says, squinting at the spilled honey. This looks like the solar map of Delphi. You lean over. He's not wrong. The honey has spread into strangely ordered shapes. Arcs, spirals, radiating lines that resemble ancient sacred geometry. Apollo kneels beside it, overtaking his usual ego. Do you think they're channeling something? Athena watches quietly. There are old stories, she says, about bees being messengers of prophecy, muses in miniature. She doesn't smile, but her tone softens. The Oracle of Delphi was sometimes called the Delphic bee, after all. Historians still argue whether those bee-related epithets were symbolic or literal. Some records describe priestesses, melisae, or bees, dancing in temple rituals while bees circled nearby. Whether real insects were involved or just metaphorical buzz is up for debate. Either way, the association stuck. Bees, prophecy, and the sacred unknown. Apollo is speechless for once. He stares at the golden spiral on the ground like it's just spoken his name. He doesn't say it out loud, but you can tell he's wondering. What if the bees aren't just working for me? What if they're working through me? You wonder if he's had too much honey. After the siblings leave, Hermes stealing 4 jars, Artemis whistling for her deer, Athena muttering about flavor-induced epistemology, Apollo sits in silence. Even Gavin lands gently on his finger, just once. Before flitting away, he turns to you. Do you think they saw it? He asks quietly. Do you think they understood? You hesitate, then nod. I think they saw something. He smiles, tired but satisfied. Tonight, there are no liars. No planning boards. No absurd new flavors like ambrosia with nutmeg. Just the sound of bees settling in, a soft rustle of thyme, and the occasional croak from that judging frog again. You lie back under the stars, the smell of wild lavender in the air, and listen to Apollo breathe. For once, it's not dramatic. Just steady. Just real. Maybe the gods don't need to understand everything. Maybe the beauty is in the trying. You wake to quiet. No humming. No poetry. No sound of honey trickling into amphory while Apollo narrates it like a wine commercial. just quiet. And bees, of course, still buzzing, still diligent, but moving with the sort of confidence that suggests no one is currently forcing them into synchronized spirals. You stretch. Blink. Glance over. Apollo is missing, not in the dramatic vanishing god way, more in the suspiciously calm, I'm up to something way. You find him down by the stream, hunched over a mound of dirt and holding a tiny wooden comb. What are you doing? He looks up, startled. There's honey in his hair and what might be oregano behind his ear. I'm expanding, he says. You blink. Slowly. Terrace hive system, he adds, as if that explains anything. Multiple entry points. Zone pollination paths. Climate control via mist tunnels. It's the future. You realize with some concern that Apollo has entered what might be called the urban planning phase of his beekeeping journey. He draws a diagram in the dirt. It looks vaguely like a Mediterranean amphitheater married a wasp's nest. I'm designing a utopia, he continues, where bees have designated recreation zones, wellness chambers, and sacred hexagonal libraries. You nod cautiously, and maybe, he adds, eyes gleaming, a council. You raise an eyebrow, a bee council. Of course, you learn, too late, that he's already built a temporary council pavilion out of marble tile shards and laurel branches. It features 7 miniature thrones and a central podium. He introduces each imaginary bee council member in excruciating detail. This is High Drone Pollux. He governs nectar trade. This is Elder Stingerna. She handles interspecies diplomacy. And this, he says, holding up a walnut shell, is Belepites. He writes constitutional law. You ask, with all the strength of a sleep-deprived mortal, why? Because, Apollo replies solemnly, we must protect the hive's sovereignty. It's official. He's gone full bee-state philosopher. And you? You're now chief aide to a make-believe insect oligarchy. By midday, the urban hive is alive. Bees swarm around new structures, hollowed gourd towers, resin-glazed arches, leaf awnings fluttering gently in the breeze. Apollo is assigning ceremonial titles. You are now keeper of the pollen ledger. Rhizoe is ambassador to the aphids. Gavin, ever chaotic, has been given the role of minister of vibes. The weirdest part? It's sort of working. The bees seem more organized, less frantic. They follow distinct pathways, enter specific chambers, even rest in shaded alcoves shaped like flower petals. Apollo, beaming, gestures to it all. We've created bee democracy. You glance around. It looks more like bee bureaucracy, but okay. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greeks genuinely believed in the intelligence and social order of bees or whether it was romantic projection. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BCE, described bees with near reverence, noting their roles, their dances, even their hierarchy, though he mistakenly thought the queen bee was male. Sorry. Some modern scholars think early Greek hives were studied not just for honey, but for political inspiration, the harmony of communal labor, the structure of roles, the way no bee hogged all the nectar. Apollo, naturally, interprets this as divine endorsement. Bees are the blueprint, he says dramatically, for ideal governance. Just enough order. Just enough chaos. And zero speeches from Zeus. You agree on that last point. Still, there's tension in paradise. That evening, one of the bees, possibly Belepides, goes rogue. He flies in tight loops above the herb garden, then dive bombs the ceremonial amphory and causes a cascade of sticky destruction. 3 jars fall. 2 shatter. 1 lands squarely on Gavin, who is too stunned to buzz. Apollo gasps. He's protesting, he whispers. It's a strike. You point out that it might have just been a clumsy landing. No, Apollo insists. This was political. He's demanding autonomy. He spends the next hour drafting a bee constitution on olive bark strips. It includes clauses like, all bees shall have access to time of their choosing. No drone shall be judged for offbeat waggle dances. Emergency nectar reserves must be kept in hexagonal vaults only. You try to hide your laughter. You fail. In retaliation, or possibly solidarity, several bees swarm the ceremonial podium and begin dismantling it, piece by tiny piece. Apollo, hands on hips, watches in horrified reverence. They're reclaiming the hive, he says. It's almost touching, in a surreal, beekeeping anarchist kind of way. That night, Apollo does not sing. He does not draw. He just sits by the hive, watching the bees rebuild in their own way, without his maps or rules. He looks oddly peaceful, I guess. Maybe I tried too hard, he says softly. You nod. They don't want councils, he mutters. They want flowers. He tosses a laurel leaf into the wind. Maybe I'm not their ruler, he admits. Maybe I'm just their roommate. That, at least, you can agree on. And so, the hive begins to shift again, less structured, more fluid. Apollo steps back, lets the bees arrange things the way they prefer. Hexagons bloom in surprising places. Nectar flows in spontaneous routes. No more ministers, no more marble thrones, just bees. In time, and the hum of something real. You both fall asleep under the stars, backs against the grass, and for once, no one's trying to label the moon's flavor. Tomorrow, the honey might taste different. Tomorrow, the bees might try jazz again. But tonight, there's simply bees. And that's enough. The bees have taken over the fig tree. You wake to find the lowest branches braided with honeycomb like some kind of edible chandelier. Bees move in slow, deliberate choreography across the bark, threading between fruit and flower as though rehearsing for a very exclusive botanical opera. Apollo, still lying on his back in the grass, doesn't even flinch. I call it the age of decentralized pollination, he murmurs, eyes closed, arms flung wide like he's expecting divine applause. You sit up and squint at the fig tree. It's a commune now, he explains. No central hive, no government, just bees being bees. No forms, no titles, not even a single ceremonial sash. You almost tear up that it took a week of bee rebellions, 3 stings to Apollo's left elbow, and a destroyed amphora throne. But he's finally embraced the idea that bees don't want politics. They want pollen. He seems calmer, like he's entered his soft god era. And yet, this being Apollo, the quiet won't last. Sure enough, he claps his hands suddenly. I'm going nomadic. You stare. With the bees, he adds. We travel, from flower to field to forest. No more staying in one grove. No more proprietary amphora packaging. Just wild honey, wild stories, and maybe a traveling apicultural chorus. You're not sure whether to groan or pack a bag, but, he continues, we need to test it first. A trial migration, a miniature exodus. And that's how you end up carrying a sack of sage, a reed flute, and 2 experimental bee canoes made of hollowed zucchini down the slope toward a poppy-covered meadow. The bees, somehow, are already ahead of you. They swarm in a strange spiral path, like they're spelling cursive letters in the air. Gavin loops around your head once, then zips toward the poppies as if to say, keep up, slowpoke. Apollo is giddy. He's rewritten an ancient hymn into a traveling song, which he sings off-key. O sunlit swarm, O petaled path, to every bloom we bring our math. From thyme to fig, from vine to rose, we waggle where the nectar flows, you trudge silently. The bees adapt quickly to the new meadow, latching onto scarlet poppies with terrifying precision. Apollo builds a temporary bee altar using smooth stones and dandelion crowns. He calls it the Shrine of Soft Beginnings. You call it a weird rock pile. Later that day, he performs what he claims is a sacred pollination ritual. It involves standing barefoot in the meadow, twirling slowly with a sprig of lavender in each hand, and whispering to the bees in ancient Doric Greek. You catch exactly 3 words: nectar, eternal, and something that might mean pollen pants. One poppy, overwhelmed by all this reverence, topples. It's unclear whether the ritual works, but Apollo insists the honey tastes more emotionally complex today. You try it. It's good. A little peppery, with a tinge of wild mint, and something nostalgic you can't quite place. Childhood. Regret? Oversteeped chamomile. Whatever it is, the bees seem thrilled. And so does Apollo. That night, you both camp out under the stars beside the poppy field. He wraps himself in a cloak made of woven bee-shed wax. Don't ask. And you use a satchel of thyme as a pillow. I think they're happier here, he says. You hum in agreement. It's true. The bees seem lighter, looser, like they've shrugged off the weight of Apollo's ambitions. They no longer build in grids. Their combs resemble coral reefs now, curved, spiraled, organic. Strange beauty in imperfect angles. That it makes sense. The earliest beekeepers in ancient Greece didn't use rigid frames or square hives. They used clay pots, woven baskets, even old amphorae, whatever mimicked the natural curves of a tree or cave. Honey wasn't a product, it was a gift, a consequence of coexistence. Historians still argue whether those early beekeepers saw themselves as caretakers or just lucky harvesters. Some say they whispered to the bees, believed in bee souls, even buried their hives with honors when they died. Others say they were just very sticky people with no soap. Apollo definitely leans mystical. They're oracles, he says, watching a cluster of bees performing a curious midair loop. Their flight patterns mean something. This one, he points, that's clearly a warning about oversalting lentils. You decide not to challenge him. Later, he grows quiet. I used to think I had to control the music, he says. Like, if I didn't orchestrate every note, it wouldn't be divine. But the bees, they hum without sheet music. And it's still perfect. You glance at the hive tree, where a tiny bee rests in the crook of a blossom. Its wings twitch, but it's not working. Just existing, floating in a sliver of moonlight. Maybe that's the real miracle, not the honey, not the prophecies. Just that these tiny, frantic creatures can pause and breathe. You fall asleep to the soft rattle of reeds in the wind and the occasional snoozy buzz drifting through the cool night. No speeches. No planning. Just stillness. You dream of flying. Not with wings, but with wind. Floating across a field of golden time. Unbothered by gravity or purpose. When you wake, there's honey on your cheek. You don't even question it. The bees have officially rebranded. Not that they held a press conference or started a lifestyle blog, but there's a noticeable shift in their behavior since Apollo left. Less dramatic wing flaring, fewer aerial sonnets, more quiet buzzing and business as usual. If they've gone minimalist, you watch them from a soft patch of moss under the fig tree, the one that used to be Apollo's amphora throne. It's just a tree again now. A few combs dangle like chandeliers with boundary issues, but most of the grand design has mellowed. It's become cozy. Gavin floats by, balancing a petal like a waiter with a fancy tray. You swear he winks that you've become their observer now. Their biographer. Their designated tall mammal with opposable thumbs and zero nectar. Your job is simple. Stay out of the way and refill the rosemary dish every 3 days. You do it gladly. Without Apollo's high-concept meddling, the bees have leaned into what they do best. Make honey, pollinate flowers, and occasionally headbutt a butterfly for looking at them funny. The meadow, once a stage, is now a sanctuary. And yet, you can't help but notice something odd happening with the honey. It's glowing. Not aggressively. Just a soft shimmer under the moonlight, like someone stirred in a drop of starlight or a pinch of philosophical clarity. You taste a bit. It's sweeter than usual, with a strange aftertaste, almost like cedar smoke and memory. The kind of honey that makes you remember someone's name you haven't spoken aloud in years. You stare at the bees. What did you put in this? Gavin does not respond. You begin to suspect something divine is still happening. Historians still argue whether divine relics ever left traces in honey. The Delphic bee priestesses claim that prophecies sometimes sank into the comb, encoded in flavor. A citrusy sting could mean war. A bitter tinge? Betrayal. And once, reportedly, a particularly minty batch foretold the invention of socks. You spend the next 3 days sampling every batch of honey like a sleep-deprived wine critic. Point 1 tastes like time and regret. Another? Apricot and foreshadowing. A third tastes like something you can't describe, but it makes your teeth tingle and your left ear itch. You decide that one's a weather warning and leave it alone. That it's not just the taste. The bees are moving differently too. Some form small circles midair and just hover, like they're waiting for someone to notice. Others draw tight figure eights, but not for flowers. Just to do it. A kind of ritual? That's when you find the circle that it's burned faintly into the grass near the edge of the meadow. Perfectly round. No scorch marks, no footprints, just flattened stalks in a clean, deliberate spiral. Inside, there's a single petal. Lavender. You call it the omen patch. It buzzes when you get too close. That night, you lie awake under the stars, listening to the hum. It's not chaotic anymore. It pulses gently, like a heartbeat. Like they're waiting. Not for Apollo. He's clearly off trying to serenade olives into early ripening. But for something else, maybe even for you. The next morning, the bees are gone. All of them. No Gavin. No background hum. No spiral flights or pollen gossip. Just silence and a cold wind through the rosemary bush. You sit very still. You check every comb, every flower, even the omen patch. Nothing. It's like they were never here, but the honey remains. So much of it. Stacked in neat jars. Jars they obviously didn't physically make, unless someone taught them glassblowing, which now glisten in the sunlight like golden monuments. You touch one. It's warm, Each jar has a single symbol on the lid. Not letters, but tiny etchings. A wave, a flame, a spiral, a sleeping eye. You run your finger along one and feel your chest flutter. Something shifts inside you, like a dream waking up. You taste from the jar with the sleeping eye. Everything slows that you're not in the meadow anymore, that you're in a cave, lit by beeswax torches. Walls made of amber combs. A low hum in the distance, like a lullaby you forgot you knew. A figure steps forward, tall, robed in pollen-colored silk, face covered in a veil of tiny bees. "Do you see now?" she asks. You blink, and you're back. Same moss. Same sun. Same stack of jars. The bees aren't gone, they've just evolved, they're somewhere else. Another layer of existence. Not higher, not lower, just shifted. They've moved into myth. The jars are their gift. You spend the rest of the day organizing them. Not by flavor, but by symbol. You build a shelf from the old amphory shards and arrange them like a sleepy museum exhibit. As evening falls, a single bee returns. Gavin. He lands on your knee. Head tilts slightly, then zips toward the almond patch. He hovers there, spins once, and vanishes into the grass. And that's enough. You nod to the jars. You whisper a thank you. Then you light a tiny beeswax candle just to keep the hum going. That night, the honey dreams begin. Not bad dreams. Not scary. Just vivid that you're flying again. But this time you're not alone. A whole swarm beside you. Each bee trailing light. Each wing beat a note in some forgotten lullaby. You feel weightless. Unworried. Part of something much older than fig trees or gods with hobbies. You sleep deeply, without dreams, for the first time in weeks. And in the morning, more jars. You're woken by a bee wearing a tiny crown. Not a real crown, of course. Just a speck of golden pollen perfectly balanced on its fuzzy head like a royal accessory. But it hovers with such smug authority that you instinctively bow. Apollo claps. She accepts your tribute. He says solemnly, biting into a fig with the theatrical flair of someone pretending it's a sacred rite. You rub your eyes. The meadow has changed. Overnight, the bees have restructured their new home into something intricate. Not planned like the marble council halls. Not chaotic like the early days, but harmonious. Organic. The combs spiral through the poppy stems like amber lace. A network of tunnels buzzes beneath overturned flower pots Apollo must have borrowed from a nearby village. Somewhere, Gavin is painting bee-sized frescoes using beet juice and crushed petals. Apollo watches them like a proud dad at a third-grade science fair. They've reached their golden phase, he whispers, when art and function merge. It's like Minoan architecture, but smellier. You walk among the floral corridors, brushing past blossoms vibrating with activity. The hum is softer now, less industrious, more meditative. Then you hear it. A harp. You freeze. Apollo shrugs. I couldn't help it. You squint at him. I kept it gentle, he promises. Just a few chords. In C honey major. You sigh deeply. That's not a real key. You know it. He knows it. The bees probably know it. Still, it's beautiful. A sleepy tune, drifting across the meadow like steam from a teacup. The bees don't seem bothered. In fact, a few seem to sync their wing beats to the rhythm. Apollo lowers the harp and lies back in the grass. I've been thinking about Orpheus, he murmurs. All that time with his lyre, trying to control nature with sound. But maybe the point isn't to lead the music. He gestures to the bees. Maybe it's to join the hum. You don't respond. There's something fragile about this moment, like a soap bubble mid-flight. Words might pop it. He rolls onto his side. Do you know bees once nested in the Temple of Delphi? You raise an eyebrow. They say the original priestesses, the Thryae, were part bee, part woman. Oracles who spoke in buzzing riddles. Sacred messengers. You nod slowly, recalling something about that. Scholars still debate whether the Thryae were literal bee goddesses or just poetic metaphors. Either way, bees were bound to prophecy in ancient Greek imagination. Whisperers of truth. Sweet but sharp, Apollo sighs. I wanted to be their Delphic king. I wanted marble scrolls and buzzing sonnets and ambrosia reviews. He glances at the comb-laced poppy stems. But they don't need a king. He's quiet for a long time. I think I'm ready, he finally says. You wait. To give up the project. You freeze, Apollo. Giving up? It's not failure, he continues. It's artistic release. The hive is self-sustaining. They've learned. I've learned. They don't need Apollo hovering over them like a sun-drunk nanny. You sit beside him, letting the soft grass itch your arms. He means it. For once, he's not scheming or sketching hive upgrades in the dirt. Just lying still, watching bees ferry nectar like skybound waiters. And yet, you know that tone. That subtle god restlessness. He may be done with beekeeping, but he's not done needing a project. Sure enough, after 10 minutes of quiet reflection, he turns to you and says, "Do you think olives would grow faster if I sang at them?" You groan. The man cannot be stopped at BY evening. He's packed a satchel, figs, thyme, several jars of honey, a scroll of bee poetry titled Comb Verses, and tied his cloak in a new dramatic fold he calls Melancholic Wanderer Drape. You help him strap the harp to his back. The bees gather in clusters as he says goodbye. He pauses before one of the hives. To Queen Polina, he whispers, touching 2 fingers to his forehead. Your reign was sticky and wise. Then, to Gavin, keep them humming, old friend. Gavin flies a loop-the-loop in acknowledgement. Apollo turns to you. Walk with me to the hilltop. You do. The path winds through wild fennel and sun-bleached stones. Halfway up, he stops and looks back at the meadow. They don't need me anymore, he says. You sure? You asked. He nods. I gave them music. They gave me peace. You snort. And a rash. Worth it. He grins. You reach the top. The wind shifts. Somewhere in the distance, a goat bleats. It sounds judgmental. Apollo turns to you, serious. Promise me something. You brace yourself. If they start worshipping a lizard, he says, don't intervene. You blink. Let them have their weird religion, he continues. It builds community. You nod solemnly. Of course. He claps your shoulder. Then, with a wink, he disappears into the tall grass, humming his off-key travel song again. The sun dips low. You stay on the hill a while, watching the bees below. No councils. No marble. Just bees doing bee things in bee time. You smile. Back in the meadow, Gavin buzzes upward, spins once, and zips toward a rosemary bush like he's got somewhere urgent to be, and maybe he does.